Thunder crashed in the distance as Zachariah O'Brien clutched the worn invitation to the church social in her trembling hands. Spring of 1872, in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, was supposed to bring new beginnings, but the weight of her father's recent passing left her adrift in a town that no longer felt like home. The social was her last hope to connect with the community before she would be forced to sell their small ranch and move back east to her aunt's home in Boston. Zachariah Zach to those who knew her smoothed down her best Sunday dress, a modest blue calico that had seen better days. She hadn't attended a social since before her father took ill, and the prospect of facing the townsfolk alone made her stomach twist with anxiety. But Papa's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let fear keep you from living, Zach girl." With those words steeling her resolve, she stepped into the crowded church hall. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Ladies in their finest dresses clustered around tables laden with food, while men gathered in corners discussing cattle prices and the railroad's slow but steady approach to their territory. Children darted between adults, playing improvised games of tag despite their mother's scolding. Zach moved through the crowd, accepting condolences with practiced grace. "Such a shame about your father," Mrs. Peterson said, patting her hand. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do with the ranch?" "I'm still considering my options," Zach replied, the practiced response falling easily from her lips even as her heart ached. The truth was, there were no options. The bank would foreclose within the month. As she made polite conversation, her gaze was drawn to a solitary figure standing against the far wall. Tall and lean, with shoulders that spoke of hard work and eyes that seemed fixed on some distant horizon only he could see. His dark hat was pushed back slightly, revealing sun-bronzed features and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. "Who is that?" she asked Mrs. Peterson, trying to sound casual. "That's Benjamin Rowland," the older woman replied, lowering her voice. "Been working at the Double Creek Ranch for nearly 2 years. Keeps to himself mostly. Never seen him crack a smile, not even at church. Some say he lost someone in the war, others say he's running from something back east. Either way, he's not much for socializing." Zach couldn't tear her eyes away from him. There was something in his stance, a controlled tension, like a coiled spring that spoke of buried emotion rather than coldness. Before she could analyze her own interest further, Reverend Johnson called everyone to attention. "Friends and neighbors, let us give thanks for this blessed gathering," the Reverend began. "And let us welcome back Miss Zachariah O'Brien, who has been absent from our socials while caring for her dear departed father." All eyes turned to Zach, who felt heat rise in her cheeks. From across the room, she caught Benjamin Rowland's gaze for the briefest moment. His expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps made her heart skip. The music started shortly after the blessing, a lively fiddle tune that had couples forming lines for a country dance. Zach found herself sitting with the older women, watching as younger girls were quickly claimed by eager partners. "You should dance, dear," Mrs. Peterson encouraged. "Your father wouldn't want you to mourn forever." Zach nodded absently, her attention drawn once again to the solitary cowboy. Benjamin Rowland hadn't moved from his position, declining drinks and conversation with a barely perceptible shake of his head. As she watched, a pretty young woman approached him, clearly inviting him to dance. He refused with what appeared to be practiced politeness. Something inside Zach shifted. Perhaps it was her father's voice in her head telling her to live, or perhaps it was simple recognition of a kindred lonely spirit. Before she could reconsider, she was on her feet, crossing the room with determined steps. Benjamin saw her approach, his expression unchanging except for the slightest narrowing of his eyes. Up close, she could see they were a striking shade of green like the desert after a rare rainfall. "Mr. Rowland," she said, surprised at the steadiness of her voice. "I'm Zachariah O'Brien." "Miss O'Brien," he acknowledged with a slight nod. His voice was deep and rough-edged, as though rarely used. Zach took a breath and plunged ahead. "Would you dance with me, Mr. Rowland?" The room seemed to go quiet, though the music played on. Several nearby conversations paused as people waited for his response. Benjamin Rowland had never danced at a church social, everyone knew that. For a moment, he simply looked at her, and Zach felt her courage waver. Then, something extraordinary happened. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but a softening of his usual stoic expression. "Just one dance," he said quietly. As Benjamin led her to the dance floor, Zach was acutely aware of the curious glances following them. His hand was calloused but gentle as it took hers, and he moved with surprising grace for a man who spent his days in the saddle. "I don't usually dance," he said as they joined the formation. "I noticed," Zach replied, feeling a smile form despite her nerves. "Neither do I these days." The dance began, a simple pattern of steps and turns that brought them together and apart in rhythmic succession. Benjamin moved with precision, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was sorry to hear about your father," he said during a moment when they were side by side. "He was a good man." Surprise flickered through Zach. "You knew him?" "He helped me find work when I first came to town. Spoke to Mr. Donovan at Double Creek on my behalf." The dance separated them before she could respond, but when they came together again, Zach found herself studying his face with new interest. "I didn't know that. Your father didn't mention many things he did for folks," Benjamin said. "Too humble." As the music played on, Zach felt something unfamiliar, a lightness she hadn't experienced since before her father's illness. Benjamin Rowland was not the taciturn figure of town gossip, but a man who noticed things, who remembered kindnesses, who moved with careful deliberation through a world that had perhaps wounded him as it had her. When the dance ended, Benjamin escorted her back to the edge of the floor. "Thank you, Miss O'Brien," he said formally, but his eyes held something warmer than before. "Zach," she corrected him. "My friends call me Zach." "That's not a proper name for a lady," he observed, but that almost smile returned. "I've never been much concerned with being proper, Mr. Rowland." "Ben," he offered in return, "if we're dispensing with formalities." A moment of connection hung between them, fragile as spider silk but just as real. Then Reverend Johnson approached, breaking the spell. "Miss O'Brien, I wonder if you might help Mrs. Johnson with the refreshments." As Zach was drawn away, she glanced back to find Ben watching her, his expression thoughtful. She couldn't have known then how that single dance would alter the course of her life or his. The following morning dawned clear and warm, typical for late May in the territory. Zach rose early as always, the habits of ranch life ingrained despite her father's absence. The small herd of cattle they had left needed tending, and the vegetable garden wouldn't weed itself. She was in the corral, brushing down her mare Pepper, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. To her surprise, Benjamin Rowland rode into the yard, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. "Mr. Rowland," she called, setting down the brush. "Is something wrong?" He dismounted with fluid grace, removing his hat as he approached. "No, madam, I just—" He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I heard in town that you might be selling the ranch." Zach's shoulders tensed. "News travels fast." "It's a small town," he acknowledged. "I was wondering if you needed any help around the place, until things are settled." The offer caught her off guard. "That's very kind, but I couldn't pay you." "I wasn't asking for payment." His eyes met hers steadily. Your father helped me when I needed it. Seems only right to return the favor. Zach studied him, trying to discern his motives. His expression revealed little, but there was no pity in his gaze, only a straightforward offer of assistance that appealed to her practical nature. I suppose an extra pair of hands wouldn't hurt, she conceded. The north fence needs mending, and I've been putting it off. The ghost of that almost smile appeared again. I'm good with fences. They settled into an unexpected rhythm over the following days. Ben would arrive at the O'Brien ranch after finishing his duties at Double Creek, working alongside Zach until dusk painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. They spoke little at first, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. On the third afternoon, as they repaired fence posts along the property line, Zach's curiosity finally got the better of her. Why did you really come to help me, Mr. Rowland? And don't say it's just about repaying my father. Ben paused, hammer raised mid-strike. For a moment she thought he might not answer. When I came to Cottonwood Springs, he finally said, I wasn't planning on staying. I was just passing through, trying to outrun things I'd rather forget. He drove the nail with precise force. Your father saw something in me worth salvaging. Said a man can't outrun his past, but he can build something new if he's willing to put down roots. He glanced at her, eyes squinting against the sun. I figured maybe you needed reminding of that too. The simple truth of his words struck Zach like a physical blow. She had been so focused on what she was losing that she hadn't considered what might still be built. What were you running from? She asked softly. Ben's jaw tightened. War changes a man. Some things I did, some things I saw. He shook his head. Didn't think I deserved peace after that. And now, his hands stilled on the fence post, still working on believing I do. The vulnerability in his admission created something new between them, a bridge of understanding that neither had expected to find. As they worked side by side through the lengthening evening, Zach found herself sharing her own fears. The daunting prospect of starting over, the guilt of potentially selling land her father had worked so hard to claim, the uncertainty of a future she could no longer envision clearly. Ben listened without judgment, offering neither platitudes nor solutions, just the steady presence of someone who understood that sometimes words were insufficient comfort. As the days stretched into weeks, their arrangement continued. Ben's help around the ranch was invaluable, but more than that, his company eased the aching loneliness that had been Zach's constant companion since her father's passing. Gradually, his stoic demeanor softened in her presence. The almost smile became a real one, rare but genuine, transforming his face and warming those remarkable green eyes. The town noticed the change in both of them. Gossip flourished as it always did in small communities, with speculation about the nature of their relationship running rampant. Zach ignored the whispers, finding she cared little for others' opinions when weighed against the unexpected friendship she had found. On a particularly hot afternoon in early June, they took refuge from the midday sun beneath the sprawling cottonwood that gave the ranch its name. Zach passed Ben a canteen of water, watching as he drank deeply, the line of his throat working. Mr. Donovan mentioned you haven't been back to the bunkhouse much lately, she remarked, trying to keep her tone casual. Ben lowered the canteen, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Been sleeping in your barn. Seems foolish to ride all the way back to Double Creek only to return at dawn. Zach blinked in surprise. You've been sleeping in my barn. Why didn't you say anything? He shrugged, suddenly interested in adjusting his hat. Didn't want to impose or cause talk. There's already talk, Zach pointed out with a wry smile, and there's a perfectly good room in the house. Papa's room. Her voice faltered slightly on the words. Ben studied her face. "You sure about that? I'm sure it's better than sleeping on hay with the horses." That earned her a full smile, one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Horses are decent company. Don't snore much." "Neither do I," Zach replied, then felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized how that sounded. "I mean, I know what you mean," Ben said, saving her from further embarrassment. After a moment, he added more seriously, "Thank you, Zach." That evening, Zach showed Ben to her father's room, trying to ignore the strange intimacy of having a man under her roof. "It's not much," she apologized, suddenly seeing the spare furnishings through his eyes. "It's more than I've had in a long while," Ben replied, setting his saddlebags on the floor. He looked around the room with respect, as though conscious of stepping into a space that had belonged to someone else. "Your father kept things neat. He wasn't one for unnecessary possessions," Zach said, lingering in the doorway. "Said a man only needs what he can carry on his back and in his heart." Ben nodded, understanding in his eyes. Wise man. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Zach found herself noticing details about Ben she hadn't before: the slight curl of his hair where it touched his collar, the faint scar that ran along his jawline, the way his presence seemed to fill the room without effort. "Well," she said, suddenly flustered. "Good night, Mr. Rowland." "Ben," he reminded her gently, "if I'm to sleep under your roof, I think we're well past Mr. Rowland." "Ben," she echoed, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "Good night." His voice followed her down the hallway. "Good night, Zach." Sleep came fitfully that night, her awareness of Ben's presence in the next room making every creak of the house's timbers seem significant. She rose before dawn, moving quietly to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, only to find Ben already there, coffee brewing on the stove. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Early habits." "Not at all." Zach reached past him for cups, acutely conscious of his nearness in the small kitchen. "I'm an early riser myself." They settled into a new routine, sharing meals and working the ranch together. Ben proved to be a skilled hand with the cattle, and under his care, the small herd began to thrive. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in fire and gold, talking of everything and nothing. Zach learned that Ben had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who had taught him the value of honest work. He'd fought for the Union in the war, serving in a cavalry unit that saw action at Shiloh and Vicksburg. The horrors he'd witnessed there had driven him west after the fighting ended, seeking space and silence to heal wounds that went deeper than flesh. In turn, she shared stories of growing up on the ranch, of her mother's death from fever when she was 12, of learning to rope and ride alongside her father when most girls her age were perfecting needlework. She told him of her dreams for the ranch, dreams that had seemed impossible until his steady presence had rekindled her determination. "I don't want to sell," she admitted one evening, the words feeling like a confession. "But I don't see how I can keep it running alone." Ben was silent for a long moment, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "You're not alone, Zach." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, settling around her shoulders like a promise. That night, as Zach lay awake, she acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Benjamin Rowland. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the wind urging her to fly. June gave way to July, bringing scorching days and the threat of drought. The creek that bordered the northern edge of the property began to shrink, forcing them to work doubly hard to ensure the cattle had access to water. On the hottest days, they rose before dawn and worked until the sun became unbearable, retreating to the relative coolness of the house during midday hours. It was during one such afternoon respite that everything changed between them. Zach had been reviewing the ranch ledgers, trying to make sense of their financial situation, when frustration overwhelmed her. She pushed back from the table with an unladylike oath that would have scandalized the church ladies. Ben looked up from the book he'd been reading, one of her father's old volumes of Thoreau. "That bad? Worse," Zach admitted, running a hand through her loose hair. "The bank's note comes due in 3 weeks, and we're still short by more than I can hope to make selling beef at current prices." Ben set his book aside and crossed to the table, studying the figures over her shoulder. His proximity sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the financial crisis. "What if we drove the herd to Prescott?" he suggested. "Prices are better there, especially with the fort nearby." "Prescott is 5 days hard riding," Zach pointed out. "We'd need help to move the cattle. I can ask some of the boys from Double Creek. A few of them owe me favors." Zach turned to look at him, suddenly aware of how close they were. "Why are you doing all this, Ben?" "You've gone well beyond repaying any debt to my father." His eyes met hers, serious and intent. "You know why, Zach?" The air between them seemed to still, charged with possibility. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ben raised his hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, calloused but gentle. "I should have said something sooner," he murmured, "but I wasn't sure I had the right." "What right?" Zach whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. "The right to care for you, to want more than friendship." Time suspended as they looked at each other. Years of loneliness and unspoken longing crystallizing into a single moment of perfect clarity. When Ben lowered his head to hers, the kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Zach answered by sliding her hands up to his shoulders, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something neither had dared to hope for: a homecoming, a beginning. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected you," he said softly. "When I danced with you that night, I was just being polite. I didn't know that I would turn your life upside down," Zach suggested with a small smile. "That you would give me a reason to stop running," he corrected, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "A reason to stay." The cattle drive to Prescott proved to be the turning point for the ranch. With Ben's leadership and the help of 4 cowhands from Double Creek, they successfully moved the herd through difficult terrain, arriving in Prescott just as beef prices peaked due to increased military presence at the fort. The sale brought enough money to satisfy the bank and provide a modest surplus to invest back into the ranch. Ben formally gave notice at Double Creek upon their return, moving permanently to what was now being called the O'Brien-Rowland Ranch. Their partnership, both personal and professional, became the talk of Cottonwood Springs, but the gossip held more admiration than scandal, especially as the ranch began to prosper under their joint management. They were married on a crisp October morning in 1872, with Reverend Johnson officiating in the same church where they had shared their first dance. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which continued well into the evening with music, dancing, and enough food to feed a small army. "Did you ever imagine this?" Zach asked as they swayed together to a slow fiddle tune, her white dress replaced by a more practical blue one for the reception. "When you were standing against that wall at the social?" Ben's hand tightened on her waist, his smile no longer rare but still precious, warming his features. "Never in 1,000 years. I was trying to be invisible that night." "You failed spectacularly," she teased. "I couldn't take my eyes off you." "Lucky for me," he murmured against her hair. "I'd probably still be standing against that wall if you hadn't been brave enough to ask me to dance." As they moved together under the watchful eyes of their community, Zach felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find. The grief of her father's loss would always be part of her, but it was now balanced by the joy of building something new with the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. The years that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Drought tested their resolve in '73, forcing them to dig deeper wells and develop innovative irrigation systems that later became standard practice throughout the territory. The railroad finally reached Cottonwood Springs in '74, opening new markets for their beef and bringing prosperity to the entire region. Their family grew with the arrival of a son, Thomas, in the spring of 1875, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1877. The children inherited their father's green eyes and their mother's determined spirit, growing up strong and capable on land that had nearly been lost, but was now thriving. Ben's transformation from the silent, solitary figure against the church wall to a respected rancher, loving husband, and devoted father became something of a legend in Cottonwood Springs. Yet he never forgot the darkness he had carried within him when he first arrived, using his experience to help other troubled souls who drifted through the territory seeking redemption or escape. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset gild the desert, their children playing nearby, Zach reached for Ben's hand. "Any regrets?" she asked, studying the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, now bearing lines of laughter around the eyes and mouth that hadn't been there when they met. Ben squeezed her fingers, his gaze moving from their children to the prosperous ranch land stretching before them, and finally coming to rest on her face with the same intensity that had first captured her heart. "Only that I wasted so much time standing against walls," he said, bringing her hand to his lips, "when I could have been dancing with you." As twilight settled over the land they had built together, Zach leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, thinking of how a single act of courage asking a silent cowboy to dance had changed not just her life but his as well. They had saved each other, in ways neither could have imagined on that spring evening in 1872, when their paths first crossed in a church social that would change everything. The legacy they created together of love, hard work, and resilience would endure long after them, rooted in the Arizona soil like the cottonwood trees that gave their ranch its name. Deep-rooted, strong, and able to weather any storm that came their way. For two people who had once been adrift, they had found in each other not just love, but a place to truly call home,